And so we are going to get back into our session for today. And I have the pleasure of introducing Mary Stuver, who will present the theme Women as Catalysts for Change as our lead from the Content Development Working Group. She'll then facilitate a panel discussion among some of the Women's Forest Congress Advisory Council members. Mary has served as District Forester at Chama District Forester since 2010. She has a BS in Forest Management for Oklahoma State University and an MS in Biology Fire Ecology from the University of Mexico. Mary's key focus is on fostering healthy and resilient forests and communities that support and are supported by sustainable forest activities. If we have time after the panel, we will have a question and answer session with the panelists. I will now turn it over to Mary.
Thank you, Mia. What we're talking about today, the role that women have had in changing the professional forestry environment and will have in changing that environment, it's actually hard to tease out. I've thought a lot about this as we've worked together to envision the Women's Forest Congress. When I entered the field of forestry like 40 years ago, things were really different. Some of the changes, for one, there was a general rule that foresters fly under the radar. We were advised to keep buffers of untreated land next to major highways, to not advertise the work we were doing. And yet today, transparency is more the rule, and outreach to the public is highly valued. Timber management was a real strong value, especially in the Southwest where I worked, where trees don't even grow fast. And today we seem to focus more on utilizing our timber activities as a way to achieve stronger forest resilience. In fact, our definition of forestry is so much broader. We embrace so many fields and passions and interests, from forest bathing to wildland firefighters, from forest products to forest recreationists. It's super exciting to see who identifies with the challenge of stewarding healthy forests. When I first showed up to a Forest Service district office, women who worked in forestry were advised and encouraged to be more like men in their dress and mannerisms, performance. Today, there seems to be a lot of support for anyone to be themselves. And people are valued for their own skills and experiences, their knowledge, their values that they are bringing to the table. So how many of these changes that we've seen in the last 40 years reflect the influence of women? Some of this is happening on a large societal basis and possibly reflects the bigger picture of women's voices in the workplace. My personal preference to understand this is through storytelling. I think as we critically listen to women's stories, just like we did in the break, we'll start seeing more of the influence that having women in the field of forestry and how forestry is evolving and benefiting from having women in the workplace. So today we've invited 3 members of our Women's Forest Congress Advisory Council to share their stories. I come into forestry from that traditional pathway of a college degree in forestry and years of handling prisms and paint guns. But these women have all had unique pathways into our field, and I'm so excited to hear their stories. So we're going to start with the first prompt for our panelists, and if our panelists can make sure they're unmuted. And I'd like to ask Caitlin to share her story and pathway.
Yeah, thank you so much, Mary. So I am one of those people who came into the natural resources realm working for organizations that work on or for trees after following my interest in the legislative process and policy work. So I grew up spending a ton of time outside at our national parks and forests with my family, camping and hiking, but I didn't see a career path in that unless I was going to go to get a forestry degree or a natural resources degree. So my educational background is in communications and public relations. And then in college, my senior year, I had an opportunity to be a lobbyist intern for the South Dakota Coalition for Ending Domestic and Sexual Violence. And that internship is what kind of changed my entire trajectory from searching to be at a PR firm or a corporate communications type role into wanting to focus on working in nonprofits and associations that are more mission-driven organizations. That's really where I kind of saw my future career path going. So I went to work at AmeriCorps for a legal aid society, and then transitioned into my first job in government affairs, working for a nonprofit trade association. And there I got to dip my toe in, no pun intended, on working on impaired waterway issues. I helped work on their green building initiatives. And that's then when I kind of leaped into the forestry work with the Western Forestry Leadership Coalition and the Council of Western State Foresters. So that was my first foray into this forestry community. And I spent time working as a government affairs director and then stepped into the executive director role. I also had an amazing opportunity to work for the U.S. Forest Service on a detail as the Deputy Director of Fire and Aviation for a short time period. So now I'm the CEO and Executive Director of the International Society of Arboriculture, and I work to represent over 25,000 members who work with trees as arborists, urban foresters, also people who really just care about trees around the world. So I have that opportunity to impact the issues that I care about and ensure that the resources that they work on a daily basis that are so important to our health and our communities are going to be around long after I'm gone, by acting as a bridge between the practitioners in the field and the people creating the laws and policy issues. So it's been a great way to combine my personal and professional interests and kind of continue my career working in the natural resource realm.
So you didn't come into the field as a forestry major, but boy, sure you have spent an incredible career in the forestry field. So thanks for being here. Absolutely. Ebony, are you ready to share your story and pathway?
Sure. Good afternoon. My story is a little bit different. My background is not in forestry. It's not in conservation or environmental protection. Like many people in my age group, I have a kind of a circuitous route to this. My background is in nonprofit management, looking primarily at governance and organizational development. For 15 years prior to what I'm doing now, I was working in the affordable housing industry and small business development. One of the things that always struck me about that was watching cornfields and tobacco fields turn into housing development, which we absolutely need affordable housing, clean, safe, affordable housing. But it also kind of hurt me sometimes when I saw what was happening to our farmland, to our wooded land. So I've always had this conflicting battle with myself and even with the work I do about what's most important. How do we find a happy medium between the two? I didn't know, in fact, that I was a conservationist or an environmentalist till around 2006 when I started working with the land trust community around issues of our working together more closely in the affordable housing space. And it's interesting, the thought about it was they're not that different than we are. And that's one of the challenges that we all have is how do we, and that's what I've spent a lot of my time doing since 2006, is trying to highlight what the differences are and what the commonalities are, and how do we find common ground on both of those, because we need all of this if we're going to be able to survive. So as I said, it was circuitous. I ended up at the Land Trust in 2009. And oddly enough, it felt like it was home. I live on family land, surrounded by trees, and didn't know that I was in a forest. I just thought it was the family land. So it's all very interesting to me. But I think also it has provided me with an opportunity to educate more people who, like myself, have gotten to different places and more circuitous routes, but who also are landowners, who have forested land, who have woodland, and don't really understand the value and what you should or could be doing with that land as an asset for you and your family.
Thank you, Ebony. Really insightful and makes me think about our language and how we may be saying more of the same things, but we are using different words and different ideas around
Yes.
it. And that the more we visit together and talk together, the more expansive we can be in terms of who we can reach and share these stewardship messages with. Mary Kate, please introduce yourself in the way with a story of how you came to be who you are.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Caitlin and Ebony, for sharing your stories already. So I come from, Caitlin and I joked about this on our prep call, very opposite background. I grew up on a cul-de-sac in Indiana and don't think I ever went to a national forest or hardly even a county park or state forest or anything like that for a very, very long time. Just wasn't how I grew up. Did not grow up camping, hiking, any of that sort of outdoorsy stuff. And my mom now goes, "Where did you come from?" But the path that took me there did start really young. About age 10, my older brother gave me a book, Through a Window by Jane Goodall, and she quickly became my complete idol, heroine, and still is to this day. And if anyone's near the Chicagoland area, there's a great exhibit on Jane Goodall's life and her pathway at the Field Museum right now. I highly recommend checking it out. But with that, I just grew up being this little girl in Indiana who was like pretty convinced she was going to be the next Jane Goodall a few decades later. And when I got into college, I was studying animal behavior, which led into ecological or environmental anthropology. So I actually have an anthropology degree on the sciences side, more than cultural, about how humans are interacting with their environment, which really gave me an interesting science-based view, but also very human-centric view of the interactions between people and the environments in which we live, which I think pretty naturally leads people to want to do better about stewarding those resources when you start to see how modern life is going. And I very fortunately had the opportunity to go down and do a summer of study in the Peruvian Amazon when I was in college. And I loved it so much, I went back the next summer. That was as close as I could get to Jane Goodall, was going down to count monkeys in the Amazon and to see what the effect of ecotourism was doing, whether or not it was having negative impacts on behavior or able to sponsor conservation to boost populations in areas that had been overhunted in the past. So from chimps, I got little tamarin monkeys and squirrel monkeys in Peru instead. But while I was there, I got the chance to speak to people from the local Native community who were partners in the ecotourism operation that kindly gave students a place to sleep and some land to do their studies on. And I really, really fell for the concepts of markets for conservation. I think I said on our call earlier, I would not, if I were getting to play Master of the Universe, make markets the thing that saved the world. But in the world we're in, I'm a really big believer that we need to get financial incentives and drivers aligned with long-term resource conservation and natural resource management. So that is what really led me into the business side of things where I am today. I came into the forestry sector through forest carbon and conserving forests through monetizing the value of carbon storage and sequestration in forests. This is about 15 years ago, and we're still working on trying to figure out how to perfect that one. It's a huge topic, and if there's any members of this group who are interested to chat about forest carbon, please always look me up. But because I needed a career and had to pay off those student loans to become an anthropologist, I found myself working with a timberland investment management organization that was really looking to bring the value of ecosystem services and better managed forests into an investment thesis and picture. And that's the world that I've been in for the past 13 or so years, is investing into forests, into privately managed forests, to generate economic benefits, but also environmental and social benefits. And so through that process, I've really found what it is that drives me and drives my career, and where I think I always want my career to be is at that nexus of how do we get more capital and resources and people and human resources into better forest management so we can just pull the lever and maximize those environmental and social benefits from forestry, as well as making sure that we're doing it in an increasingly equitable way, which is something that a lot of us in the sector are still kind of coming to terms with, how that trajectory has gone over the past. So in a nutshell, that's been the trajectory. What do I actually do? I'm the Director of Sustainability and ESG, or Environmental, Social, and Governance, for Forest Investment Associates. So that's a firm that's managing around 2.3 million acres of forest land across all major timberland markets of the US, but also in Brazil and Chile. And personally, through my career, I've had the chance to work with investors in forests across Australia, New Zealand, Southeast Asia, a bit in Africa, Latin America, and the US. And I can say there's, amazing women throughout each one of those countries and forest sectors, and really excited to be part of this community here, having more conversations about what we're doing to change the way forests are managed.
Great. Thank you, Mary Kate. And just amazing, all three of you having such interesting pathways that have brought you to the forest sector, and that you are committed to our Women's Forest Congress, and to really helping to shepherd a role for women in very meaningful ways. So going on with our path of storytelling, is I would love to have each of you share a story of where being a woman played a role in your work environment. And I have had a chance to kind of visit with you guys ahead of time, but Ebony, I would love for you to kick this one off, because your story is so unique.
Well, there's so many stories. As a woman of as a woman of color, as someone who was usually one of, or the only one in the room, it has always been, the eye floats to me when there's discussion about DEI. When there's any discussion that some people find uncomfortable, the eyes always kind of float to me to see, where I am, how am I going to react? What do I do? But for me, I have always been, the stories that are just pretty unique. I did some work in New York once, and was working for a large foundation, and they sent me out to an organization, and I had been speaking with the person who was the director on that organization, doing technical assistance for some time. We'd had several conversations and decided it was time to make the site visit. And when I went to make the site visit, I went in and introduced myself as Ebony Alexander, and the woman looks at me and said, "Oh my God, you're Black." And I was like, oh my God, when did that happen? My sense was, if you've been talking to somebody whose name is Ebony, it might be an indication that I might be Black. And she went on to say, oh, well, you didn't sound Black, and you don't act Black on the phone. And so those are the kinds of things that I've been faced with, and even working in the forestry sector, or in this whole space of conservation and environmental protection, there are oftentimes people don't mean to be offensive, but they can be offensive. And I think that if you're going to be a woman, if you're going to be a woman of color, if you're going to be someone of whatever your sexual preference is, I think you have to develop a little bit of a tough skin, not react to every insane statement, because I don't think that they're meant to be offensive. You can usually tell when someone's being offensive and when they're not. It's for me, that story will always go with me, because that happened 20 years ago. And every day when I go into a new setting, I think, so what do I do today to make sure people know that I'm Black? Or how do I, in this age of Zoom and all of these online meetings have been a challenge for me, because I don't like to have the camera on, but you have to. And it has been very different. But what I will say to young people, young women of color, it is very, very interesting. And you're at a wonderful time. It's a wonderful opportunity. Particularly if you're just starting, you almost have 3 generations of knowledge and people to get information from. There is no thing as a stupid question asked. Find out if somebody said something and you're not sure how to take it. Just build a trusted group of mentors, young, old, and most importantly, make sure that you have a core group of friends. They can be female and male, that when something happens, that you can check in with them to say, okay, am I the crazy one today? Or how does this sound to you? Because what you don't want to do is play into the stereotypical role of being me as an African American, the angry Black woman, or as any other woman. You don't want to cry, because then there's something to be said about that. So create that core group. These are the friends that you call at 1 o'clock in the morning. These are the friends that you call when you're in the bathroom and you're whispering in your cell phone because you want to scream or leave work, but you can't. So that would be my advice to how you get around that, how you look at it and build that and carry that with you throughout your life. All my life, I've had mentors, and they have been unlikely mentors, but they have gotten me through some really, really sticky and difficult situations. And they've also, provided that insight. Well, you were wrong. And you need those people who are going to tell you that you were wrong. You need to approach it from a different way.
Thank you, Ebony. And I love that you told your story and then jumped into sharing your advice on how you can encourage others to thrive in their own work environments. And so I invite each of our next panelists, combine those two if you want, or we'll come back to you if you don't cover it. So yeah, how about Caitlin? If you could share a story of where being a woman played a role in your environment.
Yeah, absolutely. So I've always been the first woman, the youngest, the only person without an advanced degree to be hired in a position in the roles that I've filled in my professional career. And I think Beatra mentioned male-dominated industries earlier, but I've also made a career of a career in those kind of industries. So I worked for my father's beer business when I was in high school and college. And then I went into home building and then forestry, and now I'm in arboriculture. So it's definitely been a theme throughout my career. When I first came to ISA, our annual conference was the first event I went to, and it was literally like 2 weeks after I started as the first woman executive director of the organization in its almost 100-year history. And I was walking down the hall of this busy convention center, and I could see a gentleman coming towards me. And as he got closer, he just said, "You're a woman, that's awesome," and gave me a big high five. And that was followed by later in the evening at a dinner, somebody asking me whose wife I was to explain why I was at the event. And so it's just interesting how there's those opposite ends of the spectrum. And I think we see that across, all of the different sectors that we all work in. And so, being a woman has definitely played a role in my work environment and how I engage with others. And it's led to me kind of working to make sure that others that aren't as well represented in this place that we work have the opportunity to be heard, and participating in events like this and trying to make sure that I'm available personally, but also help to create avenues where young people transitioning into a new career in this space have the opportunity to make connections with others, to just even have open conversations like this, because I know that that's been important for me as I've progressed throughout my career. And the way that I would encourage and do encourage people to thrive in their work areas is to really just make sure that you cultivate the interests that drew you into that career in the first place, or that industry in the first place, and that sense of curiosity or the learning that you wanted to do, that you just don't lose that. I know that I get caught up in the details and the minutia. I spend more of my time working on budgets and HR and board support and strategic planning than I do, on the work that I had originally maybe thought that I would be doing. But if I keep that original why, it really helps me kind of continue to make sure that I'm filling that bucket. And I would encourage that as something that all people should look to thrive in their work areas, to kind of retain that original fire.
And that vision of the big picture of, this little thing I'm doing today is leading to this bigger result. And yeah, that's really neat. So Mary Kate, tell us a story.
Yeah, absolutely. And this is not to say Caitlin's story wasn't great, but I'm glad I didn't have to immediately follow Ebony, because I could not beat that. What I will say is, I think my experience when I think about how being a woman is influenced by career, some of the stories that fit in with that, is that I haven't always gotten it right. And I have made my life harder so many times over. And in large part, that's because of people's perceptions and what they're expecting from you, or what they deem acceptable at that time. And I kind of just want to own that a little bit. I have made my life harder by how I choose to deal with situations, and not necessarily always reading the room, or deciding whether or not I just don't want to play to what the room is saying, and whether or not I think that's okay. And I reflected on this with my husband a bit further last week after our prep chat. And one of the things that I had never told him, and I'm a pretty open person, was about the time I was called frigid when I was about 23 in the workplace. Because I was in a sort of interpersonal, like butting heads with someone, to the point that like the supervisor was kind of like, let's talk this out, let's see what's going on. And what was frankly happening was a white man with, a law degree over me was wanting to take a lot of credit and then take ownership of work that I had spent, 9 months on, and he was going to sort of steal it. And I was pushing back a fair bit, which I still think was pretty merited. And he said in the meeting with the even older, more esteemed white man, that I was being frigid, and nobody said anything about it. And my takeaway from that was like, someday when I'm in charge, that is not okay. And mind you guys, this is like 2009, something like that. Like, this is not 1950s, 1960s workplace. And in my head, I'm going, you're darn right I'm being frigid. This is the face you get when I am controlling the words that want to come out of my mouth, that would really like to say something to you that I can't right now, because I'm not able to deal with that. And so I put that out there. This is a real small incident. And if I put it in context of things that, folks of Ebony's generation and being a woman of color in the workplace at all, I know that these are relatively minor and infrequent compared to how they can impact upon people in this forest community at a broader level. So I fully acknowledge that. So as Ebony was speaking both last week and this week, I was trying to reflect, am I doing my part? And in this side of women as catalysts for change. And this is where I think I have made my life a little bit harder, because I do pipe up. And when someone makes a crack about, is someone's wife at home preparing dinner, I will call them out on that and say, well, Paul, what day of the week do you make dinner? These sort of kind of traditional gendered or sometimes racial or nationality based things that pop up, I do kind of try and make it my job to use the relative privilege I have. I am still a woman. I'm still, like Caitlin mentioned, often the youngest woman to do something, the youngest to be promoted at whatever level, the youngest to transition in at a new company at a new level, these types of things. I'm really proud of that. But I do have a leg up on some folks that I can say, that's not okay, or gee, why did you say that? And I would encourage folks to think about that. So even if you're not in a position where your status, your labels that are being applied to you are directly affecting you in a negative way, I would say think about when we have the social capital to lend a hand, because I'm pretty cognizant there's been generations and generations that made it so that I was a woman that could say those and not get fired on the spot. But it does go against the grain of often what is expected. And Mary, as you rightly, I think, pointed out, the shift of work styles that are accepted and appreciated and maybe even celebrated in the workplace is definitely changing. but it's so not universal yet, right? So more often than not, we're still going to be in rooms where folks are expecting that the woman is going to be the convener, the fixer, the person who's making sure there's coffee, all of those types of things. So that's still happening. I actually have a little bit more, I'd say, traditional male energy. Like, I'm really happy to have the idea and take charge and lead and do sorts of those things. And I think the thing is, all four of us are, but we're also four people who are now realizing, you know, we have real strengths because of the intuitive way we care about people, care about their whys as well as our own whys, that can make us better leaders if we want to be leaders. I think, again, these four probably do. And leaning on those strengths is something that I think is a real source of inspiration to me and keeps me going when you do get bogged in a conversation with someone who's wondering, are you the plus one, or are you the person I'm supposed to be here for?
Well, I think when we reach that point where we stop getting asked whose wife or whose husband, where's our husband in the room, or, you know, what is our purpose of being there? You know, that's going to be a real benefit. But, you know, I have a feeling that a lot of the women who will be in that room won't even have an idea that it's a thing, that they will have hopefully evolved in a workplace where they are embraced and they are recognized as having a space there and being who they can be. I love what you said about the contemplating the question of, am I doing the right things, you know, and recognizing social capital. You know, I've got social capital. Can I use it? Can I weld it in a way that can help others? And that was a super insightful message to me. So thank you for that, Mary Kate.
I'm trying. I'll put that out there. It's a trying.
Yeah, and you know, it was interesting to me. Pretty soon after I came into the position I'm in right now, I was contacted by a woman in my community who asked me, how did I do it? How was it that I would walk into the room and the men that she worked with who have discounted her all of her life would look at me and pay attention to what I said and act on what I was asking about and stuff like that. And so I think we do reach a point where we kind of transcend that place of being a woman in our careers, where we are accepted as the human that we are, and for the knowledge that we have, and we're not being judged by that. And yet I think you're pointing out that when we reach there, it's time for us to really reach back and help the other women that are in the room. So I've been kind of scanning our chat as we go through, and one of the things that's really strong is the respect that our participants have for all three of you, and also just the stories that are out there, and the Me Too kind of concept of I so understand what you guys are talking about and what's being said. So at this point, we've got some time for questions. I'd like to see if we can answer something from the audience.
Yes, Mary. So I do not mind to facilitate the questions that populate. And I do want to say thank you all for your vulnerability and your courageous conversation around this topic, because we need to be more vulnerable and know that we're not in this space alone, and support one another through these challenging times. So thank you all so much for sharing your true, authentic stories. So if anyone has any questions, I have been looking at the chat box with the comments that have been made. And so I want to thank you all for sharing your stories and experiences as well. Unfortunately, we have stories to share, but of course, we are here to support one another through that. And so any questions?
So while you're
we don't
waiting
have
for
questions, I have them.
Okay, Ebony, did you have something to say, and then Mary?
Yeah, I just wanted to add, one one of the things that we have to do as women and just as professionals is follow your passion. Don't get a job, have a career path. Don't just think about whether or not you're counting widgets or how much money you're going to make. Do something that is important to you, that feeds your soul. It's so important, particularly as women, that we feed our soul with our work. It just can't be collecting a paycheck or going in. So I would say to everyone, follow your passion. And if your passion isn't forestry or conservation or environmental protection or in this field somehow, then maybe you're not in the right place. And it's okay to be able to say, you know, I went to school for 8 years to do this, and now it's really not what I want to do. It's what my parents or my grandparents or my community wanted me to do, and just walk away from it, but follow your passion. Because if you don't, you're going to be miserable and you'll always have a job. And that's all it's going to be, is a job, but it's not going to fulfill you.
Thank you, Ebony. So we do have a question in the chat, and it is for you, Ebony. It says, how do you think we can advocate for better practices within our organizations without always being the one that they turn to because we are the representative of the groups of people that are missing, quote, end quote, from the organization?
That's an interesting question. My standard line is that the African-American community and most marginalized or historically underserved communities are not monolithic. My experience growing up as an African-American is going to be different as other people. So we've got to first get people to understand that there is not an African-American experience. There are multiple experiences. The commonality that we have is how we got here for the most part, and what's happened to us since we've been here. I refuse to allow people to have me be the spokesperson for people of color. I refuse to have people say to me, well, how do you feel as a Black woman? And how do other Black women feel? I don't know how other Black women feel. Some days I'm not even sure how I feel, because I teeter often between absolute anger. At what point are we going to stop having the same conversations and really do something meaningful? So I teeter between that and saying, oh, let's be helpful. So my advice was, don't allow people to paint you into a box, and don't ever allow people to say to you that you represent or speak for all of any group, because you don't.
A really functional add-on to this, in case it's a tool that anyone might be able to use. A good dear friend of mine is a Native American scholar and one of the few Native professors in her university, and very well known on speaking about topics of appropriation of Native culture. But being Native, she gets anything that someone thinks there needs to be a diversity thing, and there might be a Native angle, et cetera, et cetera. She's actually created an autoresponder on her emails that has a list of resources, specifies what her research and specialisms are, and how to contact for those things and where she can be a value add. We are probably, most of us, not at the point that we need that autoresponder and everything, but I think she literally gets like 50 emails a day of requests like this. Then, you know, very well meaning, and she just doesn't have the time, right? So it is the thing where she took the time once to make this little list of resources, but has gotten a lot of value out of it. And it does, you know, it's not dismissing people who are, again, probably trying to be well-meaning, but not realizing the toll they're asking of each of you. So if anyone's interested in what that looks like, she's actually posted it to her Instagram. So I'd be happy to reshare it. So email me if you want an example.
Thank you, ladies. We have another question in the chat box. Hold on one second. Scroll up. It said, and this is a question for everyone, what is one of your major accomplishments or triumphs in your career?
I'll go
You
quickly.
haven't heard much from me.
Yeah.
I'm just going to quickly say, I had an opportunity where, you know, honestly, I felt like the imposter syndrome. I got hired to coordinate all of the burned area response for the White Mountain Apache tribe. And so here I was, a white woman working, almost entirely with a Native crew and in charge of spending millions of dollars. And I had never supervised that many people. I had never managed that large of a budget. I went from, going 15 miles an hour to going 75 in the field of stuff. And it was so amazing to have the opportunity and to realize that I thought I was faking it, but what I found out was I could do it. And I really hope that everyone gets a chance in their career to go from 15 to 75 and to get thrown into a really wild environment where you really get to know that you are the competent, capable person that you want to be.
Mine is, I'm not going to say it's an everyday highlight, but it's a regular thing and it's what keeps me going. I absolutely love speaking to clients or prospective clients about what we do and how and why and where sustainability fits into the picture of their forestry investments and what that can do for others, what that can achieve. So I literally had a call at 6 a.m. this morning with the prospect and I was like euphoric and so happy after it because to Ebony's point, doing what I love, it just energizes me. It's fueling me through this whole day. That is a regular highlight. The more technical thing, I got to lead the design of a new financing mechanism for what's called blended finance, or where you take different types of capital, put it together into a single transaction or investment fund structure. Got to design this program that would basically layer on super duper levels of positive impact for Southeast Asian forestry. And I think I got let to organize and run this little working group because people didn't think it was going to go anywhere. And we made a really innovative leading product. And I was able to get the first check from a foundation, which was a new client type for us, who backed and believed in this new innovative model. And that was what we were trying in Southeast Asia. And where I knew I made it was when the head for the Australian New Zealander, kind of the big brother of our business organization, said, okay, how do we do blended finance for Australia and New Zealand? And it was suddenly like, how are we using this ESG and this impact stuff to do really cool new things for our business and for our world? And I converted the most heavy infrastructure investor type guy over going, tell me about impact. I want to do it. And that felt like a real win as a sustainability professional.
Caitlin, did you have anything to add, or Ebony or Mary?
Oh, sorry, go ahead, Ebony.
I'll just say quickly, one of my biggest senses of real achievement and impact have been in the last couple of years. We designed the African American land ethic and we were able to get it copyrighted. And it has proven to be a very instrumental tool for us as we're working with families, helping them to understand that their land is an asset and it's a performing asset, and why it's so critically important as a person of color that you protect this land for current and future generations. So just to be able to share that with families, I'll just add a quick story. The first time I did it, I was down in North Carolina, in rural North Carolina, and it was one of the test runs of it. And when it was over, an elderly lady came up to me and she was crying. And I said, oh my God, what did I do now? And I didn't know what was, and she was walking directly to me and she hugged me and she said, if my parents were here to hear what you had to say, it would have made their lives so much better. And I just want to thank you for them. So that was one of the best moments that I can remember. And it also helped me understand that we were on the right path of what we were doing.
And Caitlin, did you want to add some comments?
So, I think I would just add, and it's kind of along that right path kind of statement that Ebony just made. One of the most recent accomplishments relative to my time with ISA is that we did a corporate relocation from the very beginning all the way through to picking up the organization and relocating it to Atlanta. from Illinois. And I think that, you know, all of the things that come along with that kind of a relocation, we dealt with. And in addition to being a brand new CEO for the organization. And so it was definitely something that was a massive accomplishment, but it really set the organization and our members in a position that as we are now dealing with COVID, we were actually in the position where change was already built into our culture. And we had created this, this organization that has been able to thrive and grow during this time. And so, you know, that's definitely been something that we as an organization have really seen as an accomplishment recently.
Thank you so much. And Ray, I do want to let you know, I do see your question, but we are right at our break. And so panelists, if you all want to private chat her or send her your email, I would love for you to do that to answer her question, because I think it is a very important question to respond to. And so I want to thank you all, Mary, for being our moderator today, and to Ebony, Caitlin, and Mary Kate for being our panelists and really sharing some inspiring words that really resonated with me, but I am sure it resonated with all of our participants here today.